FANSPLAINED, a media criticism podcast with Ryan and Em. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Em.
In this episode, we're continuing our deep dive exploration series into the MCU with Thor. Released in May of 2011, only weeks prior to Captain America: The First Avenger, Thor is the fourth release of Phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In addition, we'll be looking at the October 2011 release of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer, a Marvel one-shot that is the biggest title. It's like a Fall Out Boy song.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a companion piece to Thor, and while the second of the one-shot series, it fits chronologically just prior to the events of the film it references.
And all the slow-mo, it would have made a good Fall Out Boy music video, actually.
I'm upset that there wasn't a Fall Out Boy song in it now. Thor and the prequel one-shot are set in 2011, the year of their release, overlapping with some of the events of The Incredible Hulk and other minor pieces of Iron Man 2. Where Captain America leads into the Avengers with a film trailer, Thor gives us an after-credit scene that establishes the setting and conflict of the then upcoming film. Ta-da!
Mm-hmm.
So Thor was produced by Marvel Studios and was initially distributed by Paramount Pictures, much like Iron Man and Captain America. This film was also one of the first releases after Disney's official acquisition of Marvel Entertainment in 2010. Like some of these Phase 1 outings, Thor had been stuck in a development hell prior to the creation of the MCU. Before settling on screenplay, director, and any attached casts, Thor had been pitched as a project with various different faces, or heads like a Hydra, each of which obviously never quite came to fruition. So in 1991, Sam Raimi, coming off of making Darkman in 1990, discussed the project with Stan Lee, and the two pitched a concept of Thor to 20th Century Fox. In 2006, in a Variety story, I think it was at Comic-Con, Raimi said, "It was thrilling to be with Stan Lee and the hysterical the way that we had to explain who Thor was to executives walking out of there going, 'We didn't get it. They think it's going to be some Hercules movie or something.'" And the irony of this is that Raimi produced both Hercules and Xena for 90s television. Mm-hmm. Also did Spartacus for Stars, which is basically like grown-up Hercules.
It's very violent, very gory, and a lot of nudity.
And the violence is extremely comic booky.
Yeah, because you got all the slow-mo blood spurts everywhere.
And Raimi also directed the original Spider-Man trilogy from 2002 to 2007. In 2000, from this, after Raimi did this and, Fox passed on it, it just kind of, languished. No one really cared about it. No. Marvel was still selling all their stuff to everybody. It just didn't happen.
I mean, honestly, that was kind of the attitude before Thor even came out. You didn't have a lot of people excited for it.
I mean, the same was with Iron Man. Nobody knew what it was going to be.
No.
Right, but in 2000, with the success of X-Men for 20th Century Fox, Thor was in talks of being developed as a television outing for UPN, with Tyler Mane being considered for the titular character. And Tyler Mane is like an ex-professional wrestler, but he was also famous for playing Sabretooth in X-Men.
I mean, yeah,
he would have been an okay Thor.
I mean, he was tall, he was blonde, he looks the part.
He looked the part.
I'm just endlessly amused at it being a TV show for UPN. That was the channel I watched a lot of those Marvel TV, the animated cartoons on, including X-Men.
Rest in peace, UPN.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2000 to 2004, Marvel also tapped Artisan Entertainment to consider developing Thor as a film, but it still had no studio by 2004, so it just continued to languish, going from place to place. No one really wanted to do anything with it. No one really had, a real concept for it.
Just floating around.
Mm-hmm. So in 2004, Sony purchased the film rights and was in talks with David Goyer to write and direct, and Goyer wrote for the Dark Knight trilogy, Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, a bunch of other, Blade. We talked about Goyer several episodes ago.
Yes.
He was no longer interested by 2005. So, in 2006, Paramount then purchased the rights from Sony, And they hired Mark Protosevich to write the script, and he is the one that's credited with the story for the film. So they basically used the basis of maybe this script or a couple scripts down the line. And so this outing, in 2007, Protosevich said that it was basically the story of an Old Testament God who becomes a New Testament God. And I guess in the context of... Jesus being nice God, and God, Old Testament God being kind of angry hair trigger God, I guess, but I don't know why you couldn't just say it was an impulsive kid not being an impulsive kid anymore.
Yeah, Old Testament was the violent God who wanted, you to sacrifice your children to him and your families, and willing to wipe the whole earth out. Meanwhile, New Testament God was like a mellowed out version ever since he had a kid, basically.
Yes.
That's the easiest way to explain the differences between the two.
So in 2007, also, Matthew Vaughn was tapped to direct, and Vaughn did a bunch of rewrites to Protosevich's original script, which, because of the amount of visuals that he wanted in this original script, it would have cost about $300 million to make.
Woo!
And they had to basically cut that in half.
Yeah,
so they had to rewrite the script to cut down some of the visual stuff.
Yeah, they weren't making that much money yet.
No. I mean, this film would eventually make that much money, and more than that, but they didn't know it was going to do that well.
No.
So they kind of worked on this a little bit, but by 2008, Vaughn's holding deal expired, and then he was released from the project. And instead, he went off to make multiple Mark Millar vehicles published by Marvel's imprint Icon, like Kick-Ass and The Kingsman. And then the same year that Thor came out, Vaughn came out with X-Men First Class.
Wow.
They came out the same summer.
It was that same summer?
Yep. Or at least the same year. I think X-Men First Class came out in the summer, though. I'm pretty sure it did.
What a time.
So, Vaughn leaves. Then, Gilmore, I can't ever say his name.
Guillermo.
Thank you. Del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro.
I'm so sorry. I cannot make my tongue make words.
We love you. We're just bad at pronouncing names sometimes. We're sorry, Del Toro.
Guillermo. There we go. I did it.
Guillermo del Toro.
Del Toro entered talks to direct, but turned down to direct The Hobbit. Unfortunately, because of a bunch of production delays and a bunch of, creative stuff and trying to get the funding for the film and this and that and the other, he didn't end up directing The Hobbit either. Go figure.
Yeah. I do remember when people were talking about that happening. And after Pan's Labyrinth, which I think came out before that.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? That'd probably be really cool to have him do The Hobbit, because it would definitely would have been scarier than it was.
So, in 2008, Branagh was hired, hoped to begin filming by 2010, because he was already working on a bunch of stuff. He got the call when he was working on a theater production of Ivanhoe with Tom Hiddleston.
Who he had already been with in Wallander by this point.
And so they ended up delaying the film from 2010, which is what their original projected release date for it was, to 2011, and then they had to push it forward a couple months from that because they didn't want it to overlap with Captain America, because those came out maximum 2 months apart.
Also, 2010 was when Inception came out. And then he later ends up being in the kind of spiritual successor, Tenet.
Yeah, he does. But they originally planned to introduce more of Thor with Iron Man 2 than they did.
Oh.
So they obviously had to change that a little bit.
Yes.
Because the film got delayed again. So that's basically how they ended up finally coming to produce Thor.
Yes.
Not quite as, tedious as, your main star rewriting the script every 2 minutes.
Yep.
So Thor was obviously directed by Kenneth Branagh, who we addressed in a slightly different context a few episodes ago for his recent release of Death on the Nile. While we noted this in that episode, with full context, we can also see some definite stylistic choices that continue from these earlier projects to his current work. Also, creating Thor as we know it is the writing team of Ashley Miller and frequent partner Zach Stentz, as well as Don Payne. So Miller and Stentz have collaborated on other films, such as their 2011 peer X-Men First Class, as well as Agent Cody Banks.
Yeah.
And they've also worked on various TV projects such as Andromeda and Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and a bunch of other stuff. So Payne's other work includes Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer.
Oh, God.
As well as Thor: The Dark World and various episodes of The Simpsons. Unfortunately, Payne also passed away from bone cancer prior to The Dark World's release in 2013. And so The Dark World is dedicated to him.
Oh.
But, we'll get to that when we get to The Dark World in a couple months.
Nah.
Yeah, it's about a month and a half out, something like that. So, a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's Hammer is directed by the same. I'll get there. It was directed by Latham, who was the same director from The Consultant, and has Eric Pearson returning again to write it. So with Thor, we have a bunch of Branagh benchmarks, which we started talking about with Death on the Nile, but we can confirm actually exist in other work that's not an Agatha Christie context.
Or a Shakespearean adaptation.
Yeah. Or it's common among all of his stuff, basically.
Yeah, because this was technically his first comic book movie.
Yes. Yeah, so he continues a lot of the framing tricks that he and Zambar Lukos like to both do. Mm-hmm. He's still got that obsession with framing things in mirrors.
Yes.
And that's in everything. Hamlet, this, Agatha Christie.
Yes.
He really likes mirrors. He really likes the extreme angles. Thor uses so many Dutch angles, it's not even funny. But
and almost
I don't
Dutch angles.
hate it. I don't hate it. Where, I feel like it's overused in some stuff. It worked here because the camera is constantly, moving around and kind of floating, so it's very, kinetic.
It's
very cool.
It's very kinetic. It's tracking, it's following, it's floating, it's Dutch angling, but also not quite Dutch angling.
Because it doesn't stay there the whole time. It'll quickly move back, or move to the other cut or something. So they're effective. They're scenes where they probably should be Dutch angles. It's fine. I just feel like if they'd done that with Agatha Christie, it would have been really overdone. Because it's a mystery with Dutch angles, with everyone. Yeah. Everyone's lying. Everything would be filmed in a Dutch angle. It wouldn't be a Dutch angle anymore.
Yeah, he controlled himself with that one.
Yes. And then you get a ton of the Shakespeare analogies, which I'll get to later. He does a lot of continued relationships with a lot of, creators. A lot of directors do this, but Branagh's spans even more than just, liking this very specific cast of people to work with.
No, he's... I basically mentioned this when we were watching the movie, but he's an actor's director. Where he basically, because he's an actor himself, I feel like he knows how to talk to actors and direct them in a way where they feel...
They can figure it out. Yeah,
more comfortable, but also able to improvise and be creative, but also he's open to what they have to say and discuss. Mm-hmm. And I feel like you can definitely tell the difference between a director who's good, but also an actor's director.
Unless you're Stuart Townsend.
Yeah.
I'll get to that later, too.
Mm-hmm.
So you also have the extreme angles, talked about that. A ton of scenery chewing.
Yes.
So this does a lot like the Agatha Christie ones, where the scenery is almost a character, not quite. I'd argue that he does that more in Agatha Christie movies than he does with this one, but he's almost getting there with Asgard. Almost.
I mean, he does the cosmic...
The cosmic stuff still looks very nice.
It looks very nice. And he makes sure to have a lot of it in there. Like, there's a lot of literal stargazing and floating through the stars and lighting the whole galaxy and everything, and it's very beautiful.
Yes. And you have, you have some writing similarities, or, ironies, like I noted with X-Men First Class, where you have the writers who did both of those films, even though Matthew Vaughn, left to go make that movie, right?
Yep.
But there's also a funny note, and I could probably get to this with acting, but I'm going to do it now before I forget, because I don't think I included it in the notes either. So one of the actors from A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer, like one of the robbers, who's like an extra, like a secondary character, was actually a stunt double on not only Agent Carter, so he did this for multiple actors throughout Agent Carter, but he was also the stunt double for Tobey Maguire through all of Raimi's Spider-Man movies, and for Willem Dafoe in Spider-Man 1.
Oh my god.
So, what?
So that was his butt in the Green Goblin suit?
I don't know. I have no idea. But it comes full circle. Just keeps coming round full circle. And then we're going to have Raimi doing Multiverse of Madness. And if they mention Thor in there, it's just going to... My brain is going to explode.
Or if they bring in an alternate Thor.
Or if they just have Loki in it at all. I'll die.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I probably would anyway, but the full circleness of it will murder me.
Or
on top of Patrick Stewart... it's already here.
Or just have the Loki gator just be flung
Oh my god, please,
nowhere,
the alligator, I'll die.
Flung out of nowhere, and
please.
Steven has to grab it and be like, oh, you. Throws it at someone.
Throws the alligator at somebody. Yes, I love it. I love it. I want this now. It won't happen, and I want it, but...
If anything similar to that does happen.
You called it.
And I will be the one losing my shit.
You called it, and we're putting this on record now.
Loki Gator, does he show up in 2022 Multiverse of Madness? We'll see.
So, with the one shot, it's still very commercial-oriented. It's a little less so than the first one, but again, the first one had only 20% of the budget between the two of them. And you can tell that this one had 80% of the budget. You can tell. Anyway, you can tell that this one had more of the budget. You have effects, you have stunts, you have Clark Gregg actually, doing things. He's kicking dudes in the face. There's props. They're doing things. There are other actors. Yes. You also had slow-mo. This one actually, establishes Coulson is doing, cool stuff.
And being a badass.
It's more successful with its, 3-minute runtime. Yeah, it's still a little bit like a commercial because they, focus on the car. And then they keep mentioning the car. And I remember even making fun of, their very deliberate Acura placement in Thor itself. Where I was like, come on, you're S.H.I.E.L.D. You couldn't, afford better cars?
No.
No, it's because they blew all the budget on Tony Stark.
Yes.
I mean, that's probably not true, but I'm going to assume that that's the reason. Tony Stark took everybody's car money.
Just imagining Kenneth Branagh on set being like, okay, I have to get these stupid car logos in frame. Everyone move over here.
I just remember laughing about it because I'm like, that was so deliberate. And I make fun of a lot of the later Marvel movies for being very obvious car commercials. There are some of them that are worse than others.
Which is why it's so funny when they get all crashed, really.
Right. But this one was really, it was for as much as, I like how subtle a lot of the Easter eggs are in this movie, the car logos were not as subtle.
The car logos were not subtle. They were the least bit subtle.
The placement was a little obvi. But then you have, on top of all this, the post-credits, like Branagh got to direct the one for Iron Man 2 that led into Thor.
Oh.
Joss Whedon actually directs the post-credits one here. Yeah, the one where we see Coulson out at the crater. Yeah. So Branagh directed that so that it would look like Thor.
Yeah.
So Whedon actually directs the one here that leads into the Avengers.
Ugh.
You can tell. The tone is immediately different. The writing is immediately different. The look is immediately different.
The lighting sucks.
The makeup's also not as good.
No.
But we'll get to all my makeup gripes next week. Not here. Just noting it down now. The post-credit scene was directed by somebody else.
Yes.
So, the story of Thor is a spin on the familiar with introducing godlike Asgardians to the Marvel Cinematic mythos. Thor Odinson is the first in line to succeed his father to the regency of Asgard, but this ceremony is cut short when a small group of frost giants from the rival realm of Jotunheim are found trying to break into the weapons vault of the palace. Thor does not take this news well, and despite opposing urging from his father, he gathers his brother Loki and his closest friends to invade Jotunheim in retaliation. This invasion ends poorly, with multiple Asgardians wounded and the group on the verge of annihilation, at least had it not been for Odin's interference and a failed attempt at diplomatically quelling Thor's impulsive feud. He tried. He did his best.
An attempt was made.
As a result, Thor is banished from Asgard due to this treasonous act and beginning a war in the wake of this impulsive move.
Just yeeted right out of Asgard.
Get in, losers! We're going to Jotunheim!
This bitch arrogant, yeet!
That's exactly it. Odin strips Thor of his powers, his armor, and his beloved weapon Mjolnir. Mew. Sending the Thunder God to Earth and his hammer down with him to be wielded only by, quote, the worthy. We're not worthy!
It's true, none of you are worthy.
Not unless your name is Steve Rogers.
Yes.
This throws Thor into the path of astrophysicist Jane Foster, her mentor Eric Selvig, and her intern Darcy Lewis. Thor arrives in the middle of an astronomical event that Foster becomes hellbent on researching, and Thor, meanwhile, must learn how to live as a mortal on Earth. In the meantime, Loki has discovered his own personal treason. Odin had hid his adoption from him and Loki's hidden heritage as a frost giant, and the unwanted son of their leader, Laufey, surfaces. Their confrontation sends Odin into a deep sleep. He wants so little to do with this conversation that he throws himself into a coma. Loki, I don't want to listen to this right now. I'm going to sleep. Bye.
Odin sleep.
Odin. How convenient.
I'm remembering that scene is so emotional, yet you kept saying that, and now I can't stop laughing about it. So
he throws himself into a coma to avoid a conversation with his son.
He was exhausted, okay?
He threw himself into a coma.
He's a poor, old, tired man.
Who did not want to have a conversation with his adopted son and threw himself into a coma.
You were too tiny to be an actual frost giant, Loki. You're welcome.
Regardless... Loki is left to assume his father's place on the throne. He, too, is bent on the destruction of Jotunheim, but he's in no hurry to have Thor help. Loki instead lies to Thor about his banishment and their father's presumed death.
Yep.
Good job, Loki, you
Thanks,
bitch.
Loki.
In the wake of the impending war, Odin's health, and Loki's deceits, Thor must rediscover what it is to be truly worthy of his status as an Asgardian, a man, and hero all in one, especially if he ever hopes to wield Mjolnir. I almost said that wrong. Mjolnir and return home.
What it is to truly be a king.
Mimi.
Everything the light touches is your kingdom.
It is not Black Panther time, madam.
No, it's Lion King time.
No.
Yeah. Odin Penguin is he's a lot like Mufasa.
I mean, yeah, I just bring this up with Black Panther because it's very overt there.
You could bring it up with a lot of Disney movies.
To be fair,
you
could bring it up because The Lion King is basically Hamlet.
That's what I mean. That's what I was about to say. It's more Hamlet than anything else, which Branagh made a fucking 4-hour-long version
Best
of.
Hamlet ever. Best Hamlet ever.
So if anyone would, have similar traits to The Lion King...
I mean, fair.
Especially with all the long hair they got going.
Mm-hmm.
Their manes.
Yes. So speaking of that, Thor stars Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston, Anthony Hopkins, Colm Feore, I really hope I said that right, Natalie Portman, Stellan Skarsgård, and Kat Dennings. Other cast includes Ray Stevenson, Josh Dallas, Jamie Alexander, Tobin Obu? Todan Obu.
Todanobu Asano.
Thank you. God, I can't pronounce anything, and I'm very sorry. Thank you, ADHD. Woohoo!
There's an N in there, honey.
I was trying to get to it, and my brain was just... We're just gonna insert a bunch of B's here where they don't exist. Idris Elba, Clark Gregg, Rene Russo, and Max Milano Hernandez. This is his actual first official appearance, even though chronologically we saw him first in The Consultant. That is technically a return to the role for him, and this was the first one.
I didn't even really notice him in this movie the first time I watched it, and then they give him such a...
The more you notice Sitwell later, the more you can't unsee him when you see him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they gave him such a bigger role in the Falcon the Winter Soldier that I'm like... this is the first time this guy has popped up, and it's like, no, he was in Thor, and I'm like, oh my god, I didn't even notice him in this one.
So, Thor also boasts cameos from Stan Lee, who is a truck driver trying to pull the sword in the stone, except it's the hammer in the stone, but it's the sword in the stone.
And totally annihilated his truck doing
pulls the whole truck bed off the truck.
It was so good.
So, J. Michael Straczynski, I am so sorry if I said that wrong, too. I can't pronounce things. We've established this.
No, I think that was the right way to say it.
He's one of the main writers of Thor.
Yeah.
He's the first to attempt, pulling the hammer out.
Which I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm. And Walter Simonson, who is also a major writer of Thor and artist, and he also created Beta Ray Bill.
Oh.
He's seated in the banquet at the end with the other Asgardians. He's, right between Sif and Volstagg. I didn't notice it either up until I looked this up, and then they were like, hey, he's here, and I'm like, that's rad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jeremy Renner is also introduced as Clint Barton ahead of his inclusion of the Avengers. This is technically an uncredited role for him. The real irony of that.
Yeah.
And Sam Jackson returns as Nick Fury in the credit sequence.
I remember people actually losing their minds, though, when he showed up with his bow and arrow, because people in the know, of course, were like, that's Hawkeye!
Mm-hmm.
They just knew.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know.
I think I did, but I think I was also going to these movies at the time with a bunch of people who also knew. Anyway, so...
Yeah, I don't think I knew at the time when I watched it. But then after people pointed it out to me, I was like, oh, okay.
So, you also had a bunch of different actors of the Thor that could have been, especially because we've had how many different almost iterations of this thing, right? Mm-hmm. So, back when there was a treatment of this script that still used Donald Blake as more than just a assumed fake name.
Yes.
They were considering Kevin McKidd, who was in Rome with Ray Stevenson.
Yeah.
I misunderstood what I was reading and thought they were saying that he was also considered for Thor, and I'm like, I can't imagine this.
No.
It's really hard for me to imagine this, even if it's Sam Raimi's Thor.
No, clearly he's too Scottish.
It was very odd. It was odd. So you had a bunch of other actors being considered for Thor. Thor. So first on their list, they really wanted Daniel Craig. He was the front runner for Thor, and he refused it because he had all these scheduling conflicts with Bond. He couldn't be Thor.
Yeah, he was way too busy making Bond, and honestly, I love you, Daniel Craig. I really do. You're my favorite Bond ever. But he's too short to play Thor.
It's because he was in the Lara Croft movies.
He's too short.
Yeah, I know.
He's a shorty like us.
And I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yes. So, Tom Hiddleston also auditioned for Thor. I've seen that audition. It's really weird. But there's also that story I mentioned with Branagh and Hiddleston doing Ivanhoe.
Yes.
So, he's doing this theater production when he finds out that he got Thor as a gig. And according to the story that I read, this, like, anecdote that Tom was telling later, he, like, ran into Branagh's dressing room, like, brandishing, like, an empty water cooler bottle as Mjolnir, being like, what do you think? How about it? And Kenneth's just like, well, weird things have happened. And then, lo and behold, he ends up being Loki.
Yeah.
Because he fits Loki better.
That and I honestly think the whole reason he even got any consideration at all was because Kenneth had worked with him in Wallander.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and because they had worked together on that show, and Kenneth was already familiar with his acting and familiar with him as an actor. I don't think it was just a stage production. I think it's because he also worked with him on a show already.
No, I just thought that one anecdote was very funny.
Oh, it is. It's very funny, and it's very Tom, based on what we've seen of him in, like, public appearances now.
Yeah, so Chris Hemsworth also was initially declined.
What?
They gave him a second read, but, like, basically it came down to Chris Hemsworth and his brother, Liam Hemsworth.
Oh, boo.
And they chose Chris instead of Liam.
Sorry, I'm just like, I don't know. I'm one of those people that feel that Chris Hemsworth is clearly the superior Hemsworth. I've never understood all this weird thirsting for Liam Hemsworth.
Look, I thought he was fine in the Hunger Games. I just don't particularly like his character in the Hunger Games.
I don't
That's
like
not his fault.
Well, no. I'm sure he's a cool dude. I just don't get why he's Gale and why I'm supposed to give a fuck.
Well, that's not for today. So you also had other Lokis, and Charlie Cox actually auditioned for Loki.
No, sir. You were gonna play Matt Murdock, and you're gonna like it.
I mean, he does like it. He clearly still enjoys it, but he did initially try out for Loki.
No.
I remember reading somewhere that Brie Larson actually tried out for something in this movie, too. Way back before she got Captain Marvel.
Oh, wow.
Probably Sif. Maybe Jane, but probably Sif. Anyway, we don't know. I just remember reading it. And then, yeah, so those were all the weird actors that I remember them considering. Other than, like, I think that there were people who really wanted Jim Carrey to be Loki, and I hate that. I hate that a lot. I can't imagine it. Like, he's way too old. He was way too old at the time.
And just imagining him, like, doing...
It would have turned into Batman Forever again.
No, I'm just imagining him doing, like, another rendition of the Riddler as his Loki.
Right? That's what I'm saying. It would have turned into Batman Forever again. And then Branagh would have been his Tommy Lee Jones. Just irritate him all the time. So Asano actually is, he actually found out that he had, Norwegian heritage from his maternal grandfather. And so he viewed getting this film as like this necessity because it's, you know, it's a really odd thing. Or it's a rare-ish, I guess, like, family makeup. You wouldn't really expect that.
Yeah.
So he looked at it as, like, this ability to get in touch with his roots and, you know, get to know a little bit more about this grandfather that he clearly didn't know.
Yeah.
And so he, you know, he was very into getting the role in this because that's not a thing you hear about very often.
Yeah. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah. And then he also had this moment, and I remember, like, there's this anecdote that was floating around, and I don't remember how true it was, or if it showed up in, like, a film commentary somewhere or something, I don't remember. Where Branagh actually had Hopkins, I'm just trying to make sure the leg of the tripod doesn't...
I know, that's why I moved it over here.
Yeah,
because you had it on the very edge.
Oh, that's not the leg I worry about. It's this one because it likes to. It has like it doesn't stay.
It's a leggy Lucy.
Anyway, so Branagh had Hopkins improv his reaction to Thor screaming at Odin during the banishment scene.
Oh.
And Hopkins got so into it, and I'm pretty sure it's the take we see in the actual movie, not the one we see in the trailer where it's kind of lukewarm.
Yeah.
The one we see in the movie where he looks like he's on the verge of tears, and so does everybody else.
Yeah.
Because he actually made everybody cry.
Aww.
In his improv reaction to this. And, like, apparently, like, Tom and Chris had to go on record later saying it was incredibly difficult for them to keep their composure.
Aww.
Because it was so convincing.
Him yelling at them.
You're a vain, greedy, cruel boy!
Cruel boy!
So good. But,
It's
like, the trailer read
scene.
of it is not good.
No, the trailer read of it is clearly an alternate take.
To be fair, the trailer is not that good.
No, it's not. They were trying so hard to, like, showcase all their action scenes, and it really didn't go that well. But the take they have in the movie of that scene is honestly one of the best scenes in a Marvel movie, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love
Because
that
you
scene.
have
I love
Anthony-
Tom yelling at him later.
Yeah, because...
Tell me!
Yes.
Mm.
It's so Shakespearean. It's almost like...
Thank you for the gift of Tom Hiddleston.
It almost
Kenneth.
verges into kind of King Learish territory.
I'm pretty sure
really
that Tom likened part of his... Tom likened a lot of different Shakespeare stuff to Loki, like a lot of it. I'm pretty sure that King Lear was one of them.
He also was told by Branagh to look at Peter O'Toole's role in The Lion in Winter. Mm-hmm. Which is... I mean, I showed you that.
Yeah.
Which, fun fact, Anthony Hopkins was one of Peter O'Toole's sons in that one.
No, see, that's the bad dad that Odin becomes later. Mm-hmm. Not in this movie. When Kenneth handles him, he's still an okay dad.
Yeah.
When Kenneth doesn't handle him, he's not as much of an okay dad.
No. He's kind of a shitty dad in the second one.
Do you have anything else you want to say about acting in particular?
Oh, that Brian Blessed was almost considered Odin.
Brian Blessed!
I know, we use that as a means to not, curse sometimes, just to try and curb it a little bit, because we're both potty mouths over here.
As if anybody listening to this did not already know.
As if you didn't know. I'll tell you a secret about myself. I drop the F-bomb a lot.
Fuck. Motherfuck.
Fuckity fuck.
Noise.
Sometimes we do. We say Brian Blessed, and because, he's such a awesome, big, jolly man that he probably would have made a great Odin anyway.
Oh, yeah. We watched him in that Henry V clip that you showed me that Branagh did. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, I can see this. Mm-hmm.
Just to give you a piece of what Patrick Doyle's score in other movies was.
Yeah, we don't want to use up all the Patrick Doyle stuff yet, but...
No, we don't. But that, yes. And also, he was Kevin Costner's father in Robin Hood and the Prince of Thieves.
Oh.
He's the one that Helen Rickman kills. Like,
Good
at the
job,
beginning
Alan
of the
Rickman.
movie.
Good job, Alan Rickman.
And it's like, no wonder that scene makes me so sad.
Brian Blessed.
Every time. I've seen that movie a dozen times. laugh every time Kevin just gives up on a British accent. And yet that scene is the one that really gets me. Every time.
No.
Well, that and, when... the dude who got blinded when he's, like, killed, that upset me, too.
Oh.
Spoilers for a movie that came out in the 90s.
Right.
It's a good movie, though.
Yes.
But yes, that's about...
That's about it.
Yeah, right? and also, do check out Wallander. It's a very good crime show.
We're gonna probably watch it pretty soon after this.
I can't wait for her to see how baby Tom Hiddleston looks with his strawberry blonde curls.
I'm so excited!
He has strawberry blonde curls, and it is ridiculous.
It's adorable, and I hate it.
Because they're all in, Sweden.
You're adorable, and I hate you!
Yes.
Not tacky. Adorable.
We love you, Tom, though.
We love
you.
I love everybody.
Yeah. I mean,
we love everyone in this bar!
Yeah, this cast is actually very good.
Yes.
And also, excuse you.
No, I was not done.
Oh, you weren't done?
I'm not done. I actually forgot to take notes on this because it offends me so much. I don't love everybody.
Oh, you don't?
I don't. Because we were originally supposed to have my boy, Zach Levi, as Fandral in this movie. And we did not get him because he was too busy with a scheduling conflict. I'm pretty sure it was Chuck, but I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Chuck, though. We could have had the perfect Fandral. And we didn't get him. So Marvel instead went and almost cast Stuart Townsend. And they were this close to having Stuart Townsend in this movie up until he cited creative differences.
Because he got up his own.
He's the only guy who cannot, look at Kenneth Branagh and work with Kenneth Branagh.
Pretty much, yeah.
What? Yeah, because I mentioned this earlier
I mean,
and he completely breezed by it.
I mean, he couldn't work with Peter Jackson either, apparently. These were two roles that would have really helped his career.
Yeah, especially after effing
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Queen of the Damned.
That too.
Where the only good thing about that movie is the soundtrack.
And Akasha.
Well, yeah, but I would consider part of the soundtrack.
But yeah, this guy fucked up two roles that could have really helped his career in two major movies.
Yep.
What the fuck? Dude, what is wrong with you?
So,
that you couldn't work with these directors, that you could just do these roles. What the hell?
So, instead, once Stuart Townsend went, pieced out, whatever his creative differences were, he pieced out. So they hired Josh Dallas, who's basically most well-known, I think, for Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, as Prince Charming.
Josh Dallas likened his portrayal of Fandral to not only Errol Flynn, which is the obvious descriptor here, is they're basically Errol Flynn as Robin Hood.
Because he was Errol Flynning it up the whole time.
A little too much. It gets a little into the cartoony territory. Where you can hear that, like that Robin Hood commercial with the guy that, pops down out of nowhere.
You mean that GIF? You mean that GIF I spam all the time?
Yes, that guy. That's what it feels like. But not only does he liken it to Errol Flynn, which is the obvious choice here, right?
Yes.
But then he says, Fandral is like the, quote, R. Kelly of Asgard. And this was in 2011. We've been new about R. Kelly for a long time. You knew better. You could have mentioned literally any dude that had female fans from any time in history ever. Tommy Lee, any 80s hair metal rock guy, any of the Beatles, any of people's sexiest man of the year, George Clooney, whatever, anybody, and you mention R. Kelly.
Bro, that is,
That was a choice, and it's not a choice I enjoy.
That wasn't very charming of you.
No, it was not. But
very disappointed, Prince Charming.
The real irony is that Zach Levi, one, also becomes Fandral in The Dark World, and that's why I love a lot of The Dark World, because we get the superior Fandral.
Which is such a...
It's a minor reason to love that movie, and I'm very well aware of it.
Okay, as long as you're aware
I'm aware of it, but it's my favorite thing ever. But he was also Flynn in Tangled, who was based on Errol Flynn. Or, like, a character making a fake persona based on Errol Flynn. But Zach Levi got to that one first.
Yes.
Anyway, Josh Dallas is the only one I kind of think needed to, like, dial it back a little bit.
Well, I will also add in that Idris Elba was great as Heimdall. And anybody who wanted to,
complain that he wasn't white.
Yeah, because he's a black Asgardian. Excuse you, were you guys kicking up all this shit when they had an Asian actor playing Asgardian too? No? Okay, well then shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I agree.
All the way up. You had Idris Elba in your movie.
Right? He's amazing. What's wrong with you?
Like, take several seats. And also, all the people out there who want to, get a bug up their ass about black elves and black dwarves.
I'm pretty sure they don't listen to us.
Also take several seats. If any of them do, that's what I have to say to you. Because if really...
Yeah, we won't be the podcast for you at that rate.
No. Because I've been a fan of Tolkien for many years. I don't give a rat's ass. I just want it to be good.
Yeah.
That's all that matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
If they get an actor who's capable, who's good at his job, great. And as long as they get the story right, they get the world building right.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the real funny part about that is that Heimdall is probably one of the most consistent Asgardian characters across every appearance.
Yeah. And he's a badass wielding a sword and who can see all this stuff. Like, come on.
He looks so cool. I love the character. I love the way that they did Heimdall in this movie.
I love his voice, his gravitas. Like, come on. Like, blow it out your ass. All of you.
I agree.
And that's all I have to say on that.
Yes. They also considered Stellan Skarsgård's son, Alexander, for Thor. Obviously, that did not happen.
I could see that.
But it almost happened. Instead, his other son ends up being in Internals. And you can't even tell.
As a monster.
Yeah. Can't even tell. We'll get to that when we get to Eternals, but that is a very long way off.
Well, you know what? Alexander does get to play the Northman in that upcoming movie. Mm-hmm. Which is basically...
Well, and another one of the kids plays Floki in Vikings, who is a descendant of Loki. So, I mean, it does, again, come full circle.
Yeah, because in the Northman, that's basically what Vinland Saga is based on. Mm-hmm. For anybody who watches that or knows about that series. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of Thor-like.
A little bit.
Just, I think, without all of the, magic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Thor, like the other origin films we've discussed so far, largely stands on its own, and it doesn't really need other MCU films to explain its context. Though, Iron Man 2 does set up Coulson's involvement, and this does give him more development and presence to his character in particular, but it's not really, like, hyper necessary for the film overall. It can add to it, it can enrich the experience a little bit, but you don't have to know what happened in Iron Man 2 to understand what is going on in Thor.
No.
Not really at all.
No, it's just, I mean, if you've watched Iron Man 1, you'll know when Coulson says this is one of Stark's.
Yes.
And that's it.
Well, apparently there was a comic where Tony actually does take the Defender armor, so that is a reference to a thing that happened in the comics.
He would.
Yeah. I mean, I kept making the reference that I'm like, this thing already existed, what do we need Ultron for, but we'll get to that later also. So, returning to work with Branagh on this film is Harris Zambarlukos, so I've already mentioned, who's his cinematographer, who he works with on a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. The Agatha Christie movies, Cinderella, I think. A bunch of other stuff. We talked about this in the last Kenneth Branagh episode. And while Thor does make many nods back to prior films and Marvel in general, this team-up also continues to create that visual consistency across various projects, which we've mentioned with all, like, the Branagh benchmarks. The mirrors, the framing, a lot of, like, the way the scenery is filmed and showed, and the angles and all that. Mm-hmm. It's not just Branagh, it's also Zambar-Lukos, to be fair. Mm-hmm. They're doing that in conjunction. The director wouldn't really have anything without a cinematographer and vice versa.
I mean, it also helps make... This is honestly one of the most colorful and vibrant movies I feel like the MCU has made.
I will be so sad when we get to Thor, The Dark World, and you go from this beautiful, lush, rainbow-ass movie...
Yes.
...to, we made a Man of Steel, but it's Thor.
With literal rainbows, and then you get to Thor, The Dark World,
and it's just nothing. It's gray. It's just... I want so much to like that movie, and it is so...
It's a bunch
so hard. It's so hard.
A bunch of dark grays, washed out greens and blues, and a lot of brown.
And planets that have nothing on them.
And a lot of brown, and that's it. You go from that movie, that colorful, beautiful movie with literal rainbows, to dog doo-doo. The palette consistency of doo-doo, and... You expect me to like it?
Ryan, bless
it. I think not. That is my case, Your Honor.
Well, and I was even mentioning this when we were watching it, where, like, even with Jotunheim, in this movie, you can tell, one, Branagh actually based the look of Jotunheim on these old paintings by J.M.W. Turner. Mm. He's the guy that did all, like, those ancient Roman paintings, like the ones that are on my sneakers, or my boots.
Oh!
That's the same guy.
Nice.
Yeah, he's the one that did, like, the decline of Carthage and stuff.
Ooh.
But, again, and you can see this, because they really, like, designed Jotunheim, even though it's dark and it's all very blue and frozen.
Yes.
It looks like, basically, Asgard after an apocalypse.
Yeah.
So, like, if any part of Asgard survived, say, Ragnarok...
It would look like that.
I imagine it would look a lot like Jotunheim.
Well, that, and you can also
because you can see how much of Asgard it looked like.
Well, also, you could also just see in general.
Yes, I mean that too.
With how dark it is and with how much of the color palette is the same, you could still make very distinct visuals out in it.
Yes.
And that was so nice to see.
God, it's been so long.
It's
so nice to go back to these older movies where you can see things and there's color.
Yeah, and you actually have directors that really know how to light things.
Or they're not so stymied by house style at that point that you don't really see it unless it's James Gunn.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But yeah, so, like, I was going on about that, but, like, you can see, at least, like, you can see on Jotunheim how much of, like, what used to be there.
Yeah.
Versus the Dark World, and we'll get to this when we do the Dark World, but there is nothing on that planet.
No.
The Dark Elf planet has literally nothing on it. It's just rock and green background.
Just ugly-ass rock.
It's not great. It's not great, and it doesn't really establish the setting. Whatever, I'm gonna get into, like, and then get mad at a movie we're not even talking about today.
And then everywhere on Earth is just gray and dingy.
Well, it's supposed to be London, right? All it does is rain.
Yeah, because that's all London ever is, right?
You know what? Twilight didn't even look that gray, and all it does is rain. I said it.
And it's mostly blue filtered, it still doesn't look like that.
I said it. That's how I feel about it. So Branagh also met with a bunch of scientists from the Science and Entertainment Exchange. You had Sean Carroll, who's like a quantum mechanics and like cosmology expert.
Nice.
And Kevin Hand, who's an astrobiology and planetary science expert, and then a couple other guys. And they had like these talks, and they're the ones that actually inspired using the Einstein-Rosen bridge versus wormhole, even though they said that was technically what it was.
Yeah.
Branagh wanted to avoid the movie sounding too much like Stargate, which is why they stopped. It's why they didn't use.
I was actually about to say in the end credits, where you have, the
Yeah, that
travel
thing
through
looks
space.
like a Stargate.
It does.
Yes, it does.
The special effects made it look like a Stargate for a hot minute. And I was
But
like,
that's why they were using like that very specific terminologies, because they didn't want it to sound too much like Stargate, which mentions like offhand some Norse figures on top of all the Egyptian ones that it uses.
No, but it uses a lot more Egyptian aesthetics in that movie.
But yeah, so they wanted to avoid it being too Stargatey, so they used the Einstein-Rosen bridge instead. But these discussions also inspired the change of profession in Jane Foster's character. So in the comics, she's a nurse, and Donald Blake, which is Thor's cover, is like a doctor.
Yeah.
But in this, because they actually had all these discussions with all these scientists, that's what inspired Jane, or the shift in Jane's character into becoming an astrophysicist instead of a nurse.
Well, I think that's probably better for her, honestly.
I think that's why we have that scene where they're in the hospital and she's talking to the nurses. It's kind of like this nod at it. I mean, there's a lot of nods in this movie, to be fair. There are a lot of them. The Easter eggs are not quite as heavy-handed as I feel like they were in The Hulk, where they were really just hoping those Easter eggs were going to make any part of it more passable than it was. So you have Donald Blake. He's not a character in this movie. They just kind of reference him as Jane's ex.
Yeah.
And then use it as like a fake name for Thor at one point. You have the Journey into Mystery billboard, and that is a Thor comic, or like an offshoot Thor comic. When I read it, it was mostly about Sith, but there was also the Journey into Mystery that did all the Kid Loki stuff, which Tom Hiddleston's Loki is a lot more akin to than comics old man Loki, who is awful.
Who's a real dickbag.
Oh, he's awful. He's awful. Fun, but awful. And then you have like this nod at calling Thor a little princess, which pisses him off, and then he like goes and punches a bunch of frost giants. On one hand, this is a nod to Thor in the mythology having to dress up as Freya to go get his hammer back.
Oh.
So he has to like pose as a woman, and he almost ends up getting married. Like it's a ridiculous story, but it's a nod to that. But at the same time, because we talked about this like 2 seconds before we started recording, it's probably also a nod to Patrick Doyle.
Yeah, because he did the score for
A Little Princess.
Which was directed by Alfonso Cuarón.
Yes.
Who went on to direct Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the best Harry Potter movie.
My favorite's still Goblet of Fire, but we're not gonna get into this because she who shall not be named is not getting brought up in this podcast.
No.
So there's also Thor's request when he goes into the pet shop and he's like, "Give me one of those large enough to ride." This is actually funny because Frigga's chariot in mythology is actually driven by giant cats.
Amazing.
Kind of like Thor with, like, the giant goats, which are actually supposed to be in the new movie.
Ooh.
Reportedly, if I remember correctly, they're supposed to have the giant goats in this movie.
Allegedly.
But this one's also supposed to have, like, Greek mythology in it, finally, so, like, please, God, Taika, do me a good one, my dude, please. Please, God.
Taika,
please.
Taika Waititi.
So you have that. Then you have the water tower off in the distance in this town that they made up.
Yes.
It's not a real town. Thank God I don't have to go into this extended thing about whether or not it's a real German town and when it became named that. No, it's a fake town. So they have a water...
You don't have to get that granular.
Thank God. No, they have a water tower out in the background in one of the shots where it says "Home of the Vikings." And then you pair that with the town's name, and they used Puente Antiguo, which in Spanish actually means old or ancient bridge,
Ooh.
Which implies that this could be a place where the Bifrost connects to Earth a lot.
Yeah.
But if you're doing the Home of the Vikings on top of that, I just think it's kind of
because
a cute little nod.
Yeah, because of the Rainbow Bridge.
Yes. So you have that. But on top of that, in the comics, Asgard didn't end up in New Mexico. There's a whole big extended story as to why this happens, and they kind of allude to this a little bit later in the MCU, but not quite. But Asgard ends up in Oklahoma. In the comics, that's just where Asgard is now. It's not in space, it's in Oklahoma. So it's kind of a nod to Thor being here in New Mexico, but at the same time, there's also this furniture store in the background in this town. It's called OK Furniture, and they abbreviate it like it's the state, Oklahoma. And I remember thinking that, I'm like, is that a nod to Oklahoma? Did I actually find it? Yeah, I think I did.
No, I think they're just telling everybody it's okay furniture.
I think it's Oklahoma.
No.
Yep, I do.
No.
I do. And then you also have the shape of the crater that Mjolnir falls into, which has concentric rings like Captain America's shield. And according to reports, I don't remember seeing this, but it says it has a star in the center. I don't remember seeing that. But at the same time, metaphorically, Mjolnir could be the star at the center. It is made out of the heart of a dying star.
And also, later, way later, Steve Rogers is able to use it to ground pound Thanos.
Spoilers, but also I don't care. That's really obvious. Like, they allude to this a million times.
Yeah.
Also, Steve is just Steve. Of course he can use Mjolnir.
Of course he is worthy.
I don't even have to second guess this. Like, come on. Whatever.
Use his combo move.
Yes. So you also have Tonsberg, which is the town in Iceland that you see like near the beginning of Captain America that the Red Skull goes into to find the Tesseract. That is the same town that is getting frozen over by the frost giants in the prologue bit of the movie where they like explain the backstory a little bit. Ooh. Same place.
Oh.
That's why that city had the Tesseract in it. See? All comes back. And then
circle.
There's also this funny story about how they used Laufey as the name for Loki's father. So mythologically, Laufey is Loki's mother. And in Iceland, this is still a common female name. So this caused a bit of like a chuckle with people that they used Laufey as like a male name. But at the same time, Loki is incredibly gender fluid, both mythologically and in Marvel.
Yes.
So, what's to say Laufey isn't? We don't know. We see him once.
We also don't really see any female frost giants.
Precisely. But also, mythologically, Loki gives birth to a lot of people. So
and animals too, doesn't he?
Yeah. Sleipnir, the horse, Hel, and the wolf, Fenrir. Mm-hmm.
Loki, for fuck's sake.
Yup, that's Loki. That's so Loki. But yeah, so apparently that caused a bit of like a chuckle with people because they used Laufey as Loki's father. But again, we don't know, and what's to say Laufey isn't gender fluid? What's to say the frost giants in general aren't?
Yeah, because thinking about it, we really don't ever see female...
Single gender. Yeah. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. I just thought that was a little funny. People thought that was funny.
I mean, it is now that I know about it.
So you also have many MCU nods that also had to be cut out or didn't really pan out the way that they originally planned on. So, namely, the first one is that Amora the Enchantress was actually a character concept that they drew up for this movie. They didn't end up using her, and they don't ever end up actually using that character as Amora. The Enchantress, on the other hand, will eventually show back up in a different context in later MCU. Mm-hmm. Just not in the one anyone expected.
Yeah.
Then you also have a bunch with Eric Selvig where, like, there's a deleted scene where he name drops Hank Pym that they obviously had to cut out because they hadn't made Ant-Man yet. They don't mention Hank Pym for, like, another, at least 5 films?
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, he doesn't come into play until,
it took
late phase 2, early phase
3. I think it's early phase 3 because it's after Age of Ultron. Because originally they were supposed to drop Ant-Man before Age of Ultron, but then that one ended up in development hell, and a bunch of stuff happened, and that's why Ultron ended up the way it did. Again, I'm not going to get into this before we get into Ultron, because
we'll get into it.
That is another story.
But yeah, it's a long time before we actually have a Hank Pym name.
Yeah, so they don't mention Hank Pym this early because he's not in the story this early. And then there's an alternate ending, which, to be fair, I actually kind of like a little bit better. Mm-hmm. It feels a little more organic for me. But they name drop S.W.O.R.D. in conjunction with S.H.I.E.L.D. Thing is, S.W.O.R.D. does not come into play until, like, WandaVision, by name at least. Yeah. I'm sure that it's in function kind of around Civil War-ish.
Yeah.
About the time that S.H.I.E.L.D. is not the same.
So the fact that they drop it all the way in phase one.
They name dropped it that early and then ended up cutting out that ending, and then they do S.W.O.R.D. in a very different context later. Yep. We know this because we've already gone through Captain Marvel. Mm-hmm. So we've seen the seeds of this already, but back in 2011, nobody knew.
No.
They were just name dropping it because it was a thing from the comics, right?
Yeah.
So that didn't really pan out, but it eventually pans out later, just differently. Mm-hmm. So, that said, now you get to talk about Patrick Doyle all you want. Patrick Doyle did the score for this movie and a bunch of other Kenneth Branagh movies.
And I honestly think this is probably one of the best MCU scores they've ever had. Mm-hmm. Because it's Patrick fucking Doyle.
It's one of the first that I actually remember the music in the movie. And it sounds incredibly like Henry V.
Yes.
Which was actually Branagh's concept, like, when he kept a concept in mind for how Thor worked, like a story touch mark, Henry V was the one that he would constantly go back to.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that was his first Shakespeare film adaptation was Henry V, and it was a massive undertaking because they took that play and they put it into the actual world. You had your villages, you had your interiors, all your exterior scenes, battle scenes, a baby Christian Bale in there.
Again, the irony when we almost had the writer who handled Christian Bale's Batman.
Yeah. You had Ian Holm.
Comes full circle.
You had Ian Holm in there. You had Brian Blessed in there. You had, I think Emma Thompson was in there.
His beard was amazing, by the way.
Yes.
Absolutely
his
amazing.
His beards are always amazing.
Thank God. Beautiful.
And yeah, Patrick Doyle is a pretty constant partner for Kenneth Branagh. He is a Scottish composer. He did the soundtrack for Chariots of Fire as well.
I think.
We think so.
He was an actor in it anyway.
He was an actor, too. He did the score for Brave, along with doing a voice in Brave.
No, he did not.
We didn't?
No.
Who did it?
Vangelis.
Okay, well, my mistake.
Who was a Greek musician and composer.
My mistake. Vangelis is the one who did Chariots of Fire.
And Blade Runner, and...
Yeah, he did do Blade Runner. I remember...
Alexander, and we don't talk about Alexander.
We don't talk about that fucking
So,
movie.
no, Doyle was actually an actor in Chariots of Fire, though, so he is attached to it still.
It was in his list of filmography, and I was immediately like, oh my god. My mistake. But he did do the score for Brave, and he did a voice in Brave. He definitely did the score for Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, because there are many adaptations of that. Mm-hmm. He has done pretty much all of Kenneth Branagh's films, Shakespeare and not. Like Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, Henry V, Love's Labor Lost, which is honestly the biggest flop that Branagh has ever made. And is why a lot of people don't talk about it.
Oh, also, another weird little 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon here with Patrick Doyle is Alison Krieg is in Chariots of Fire.
Yes.
With him. Mm-hmm. She ended up playing Jessica in Children of Dune. The sci-fi Children of Dune. She was originally the one they wanted to be in the first one, and they didn't get her. She would have been opposite William Hurt, who we just talked about last week.
I mean...
Full circle.
Oh my god. You want to talk also full circle? He, as we said, did the soundtrack for A Little Princess, which was directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who later went to make The Prisoner of Azkaban. And then Patrick Doyle scored The Goblet of Fire, the Harry Potter film that came after that. He scored this movie. He also scored one of my favorite soundtracks of all time for a movie that I hate, which was Great Expectations, also directed by Alfonso Cuarón.
It's true, though, that the music is better than the movie itself deserves.
The music is amazing. It's one of my favorite soundtracks, but my god. I mean, I don't even really like Great Expectations in general, just because it's
not my favorite Dickens.
For all the stories that Dickens writes, that one has to be one of the most relentlessly depressing ones of his.
There are several that are also relentlessly depressing, but that one's, whew.
That one especially just feels really... It's a bummer.
Yeah.
And I don't like it.
You don't like bummers, I know.
Any adaptation of that story is one that I'm really not into. So having the modern one with Ethan Hawke and Gwyneth Paltrow, it was like, I want to shake everyone with the exception of Ethan Hawke in this movie. And I just want to take them and throw them in the trash. Except the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack.
Yes.
Which, like I said, Patrick Doyle is responsible for.
It's a good soundtrack.
And when he also did the soundtrack for Kenneth Branagh's excursion into horror with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
God, we don't talk about this movie either. I hate it.
I actually thought it was pretty decent.
I had to watch it
for what it was.
For a college class for Gothic novel right after we read Frankenstein. To compare it to Frankenstein, I'm like, why? This movie is terrible. Why?
Well, I mean, he used.
To be fair, that movie also bombed.
He also used a lot of the fisheye lens in that movie. It was surprisingly gory, really. There was just blood everywhere. I'm pretty sure it was done that way. It was super overdramatic, over the top, like an operatic fever dream.
Oh, I'm sure that it was done for a reason. It was just
I think it was done because of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay, but that one I actually enjoy.
Yeah, we actually loved that version. We loved that version of Dracula, but for some reason...
Mina, whoa.
Shut up. For some reason, though, this one did not pan out.
No, not really. But yes, so Patrick Doyle.
He also... and for Hamlet.
Yes.
How could I forget Hamlet?
My favorite.
Probably the longest movie he's ever directed.
I mean, he had a lot of trouble getting money for that because nobody wanted to fund a 4-hour Hamlet.
Nobody wanted to fund a full Hamlet play.
Well, the thing is that the company that eventually did it, I think it was like Castle Rock, they were like, okay, we'll give you the money to do this, but you also have to give us like a cut that's like half the length so that we can put it in theaters because we are not putting this 4-hour one in theaters.
Yeah, Castle Rock was Rob Reiner's production studio, I think.
I don't remember.
Because it's named after the Stephen King...
Yes.
The Stephen King town in the Dead Zone. Castle Rock.
Yeah. But yes, I think that's who ended up funding Hamlet.
The layers in all of this.
Like an onion!
Like an onion.
Inception, we need to go deeper.
A Norwegian onion.
Yes. So, like I said, Branagh also conceived Thor originally as a comic book version of Henry V, which is a similar story of a cast-out heir trying to prove himself to his father's legacy. You see this a lot in Timmy's the King.
Yes, because
my boy Timmy!
Yeah, because he's playing the same king. He's playing Henry V.
My get is Branagh doing a movie with Timothée Chalamet.
I mean, I'm sure it's gonna happen.
Please, God... Boys, get together, do me a favor, make a movie. Thank you. That's all I want.
Make another Shakespeare movie, please.
Oh my god.
How about do a good version of Titus Andronicus, you know?
You know what? How about you do an actual film version of Coriolanus that I can watch without bootlegging, Tom Hiddleston?
You know, one that's really gay, like it should be.
Please? Oh my god.
Hell, what's another one?
Anything. You can make anything. You could redo The Merchant of Venice.
Yeah, he didn't do Merchant of Venice.
I know he didn't. I just remember it being done.
No, I meant out of all the Shakespeare adaptations, he did not.
I know.
That's one he did not do.
Anything. Just make anything, Kenneth. Please, God.
Yeah, I want to see an actual version of Titus Andronicus that's set in actual ancient Rome.
How about you make another Romeo and Juliet with Stellan, but make it not bad?
Yes, please, because I hated that version of Romeo and Juliet. How could you take Mercutio's fucking monologue and make it a whisper? A plague on both your houses. No! That is not... You are missing the point of that whole speech.
Tell me!
God! That guy worked on Downton fucking Abbey. He should know better. I expect better of you, sir.
The Shakespearean influence, speaking of, is referenced throughout, thanks to Branagh's history with the Willy Shakes productions and several theater actors who are on Thor. So you have Yes, I called him Willy Shakes.
Did you just call him Willy Shakes?
Willy Shakes.
No!
Yes! I ruined her. You have several other theater actors. I can't even get through this. So you have Hopkins, who's done Shakespeare. You have Hiddleston, who's done Shakespeare. You have Skarsgård, who did that one really bad Shakespeare that we just made fun of.
Yes.
And the guy who plays Laufey, Fjord, has also been in Shakespeare.
Anthony Hopkins in the Willy Shakes production.
And Willy Shakes! Make it like some 50s diner band.
No, he's already tried that and it failed.
America's Bandstand. Willy Shakes!
No, he already tried the musical and Love's Labor Lost and it failed.
Maybe that was a bad one to make a musical. I'm just saying.
He's never doing that. He's never making that mistake again. Not in this Golden Globe dojo.
Anyway, that's all I had on, like, story and tone, unless you wanted to know anything else other than this being incredibly Shakespearean, and we lose that spirit very quickly, and it's upsetting.
Honestly, I feel like the Shakespearean tone actually helps, because it helped a great deal, because that's just what
it's
Thor
very
is.
high concept, and it's not a thing we had a lot of at the time.
That's what Thor is. It is on a Shakespearean level because it's Nordic mythology.
Yeah, it's mythology. Of course it's going to feel like that. I mean, like, they basically, like, Kenneth talks about this as Henry V, but, like, it's basically Sword in the Stone. That's what you just made.
Kinda.
You made Sword in the Stone. That's what you did. Disney made a live-action remake of Sword of the Stone. They don't need to make one now. Thank God. Please don't, Disney. You made one. It's Thor.
Man, of all their animated movies, Sword in the Stone is one I've never gotten into.
It's because it's like a fraction of an 800-page book. Like, just a teeny tiny bit.
The only part of it I ever liked was the wizard battle, or the wizard duel at the end. Yeah. Where they all change into animals.
Yeah. Because it's like a tiny, tiny fraction of a gigantic book. X-Men came closer to referencing more of the once and future king than the Sword in the Stone does.
Yes, it did.
Said it.
But I will say this, that going back and watching Thor and just seeing how much the Shakespearean tone and the language works for it, it makes me even madder that Joss Whedon basically ends up making fun of that.
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next week because I will spend another hour just being mad at Joss Whedon. I just want to
say for the record on this one, I don't appreciate that shit. You know, like, at all.
Us mewling quims don't appreciate that, Joss.
I ain't no fucking mewling quim.
Well, Joss apparently thinks that's acceptable to say.
Well, I also find it acceptable, to shove my boot up his ass in Minecraft, then.
Oh my god. Anyway, we will get to that next week. There will be much salt, and I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people really love this movie, but...
there are parts of the Avengers that still work. It's just that... I've just remembered that part in particular. I'm actually not into that anymore, because... now, like I said, going back to it and looking at it with more appreciation than before, it just feels like it's mocking what Kenneth Branagh managed to achieve.
I mean, no one
And
doing
it's
an
mocking-
Avengers movie has ever really been able to nail Thor. And I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that. Not a single one of the Avengers movies does Thor well.
No.
Not one.
Hell, even Thor isn't right in at least one of his own movies. His characterization sucks.
I mean, to be fair, The Dark World is just messy in general.
In only 2 out of his 3 movies, his characterization is actually good or worth something.
It's because those ones are the ones that know how to be fun.
Yes.
Anyway, we're gonna get off track and start talking about stuff that is not Thor if we go down this road, and we have enough to talk about next week with the Avengers all on its own.
Yeah.
So, what would your overall rating be out of 5 for Thor? In context of all the other scores you've given out so far.
I think 4.5 out of 5 because there were some silly camera angles and moments.
Oh my god, that close up of Jane.
That was a weird one.
So funny. I love it.
It was more silly than serious, and I'm like, okay.
The thing is, though, is that I give him props for that, and I forgive him for that, because God love Natalie Portman, and I do. She's a fantastic actor. But my god, she cannot pretty cry. She really can't. Like, she just doesn't, and that's fine. That's just, it's how she cries. It's fine. It's fine. But this movie does not, like, close up on her just, like, getting full into the cry like a lot of her other movies do. Like, George Lucas, just watching all of Revenge of the Sith, and it's just Natalie Portman crying for 3 hours. This movie doesn't do that. You almost get there, but she doesn't do it.
I'm sorry, Natalie, you don't get the Oscar this year because you kept ugly crying.
But no, like, I forgive them because they knew how to cut away and still, like, give that emotion without, like, making her dive full into it to the point where, like, you can't reel that back in anymore.
No.
That's why I appreciate it and forgive that very silly close-up right after.
Instead, we cut away to Odin actually crying in his Odin slate, which was actually very effective.
Yes.
And upsetting.
Yes. So, 4.5.
Yeah,
For you.
4.5.
It's a 5 for me, but it's because I kept screaming throughout the entire time, I love this movie!
Yes.
The only thing that I would take off half a star for would be Josh Dallas. I heard you, boy. Don't mention R. Kelly again. Ain't do it.
Yeah.
But sorry, you got replaced anyway, so it doesn't matter. Gotta love you, but I got my Fandral,
Yes.
and I love him. Thank you, Zach.
Mm-hmm.
You're perfect. Thank you.
And
That's all I have to say about that.
not biased at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. I don't love The Dark World purely for Fandral. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm not really into this wildly secondary character that really doesn't matter overall. I don't care. I love him. And I will die on this hill. I'll die on Fandral's hill.
I will die on this hill named Frandral. Frandral?
Fandral.
Fandral. My bad.
The R's at the end.
Okay.
It's fine. I haven't been able to pronounce anything all episode, so you know it happens. So 4.5 for you, 5 for me. It's up there with Iron Man.
Yeah.
Up there with Iron Man. Yeah. So that's this before we start getting too into the weeds of all the other things we like less.
Yes, which we will have whole episodes dedicated to.
Plenty to say.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for listening to this episode of FANSPLAINED. If you enjoy what we do, consider donating on Ko-fi. Everything we make goes right back into the production quality of the show. We appreciate all of our subscribers and everything you do, and we're thankful for anything from Hulk smashing that like button to your questions and comments on each episode, and especially sharing the show with your friends. FANSPLAINED is a weekly media criticism podcast and deep dive podcast. I said podcast twice that time. I can never get through one of these without screwing it up somewhere.
No, you do pretty good.
And we are currently still working our way through the chronological order of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Mm-hmm. Next week, we'll be looking at the Avengers and the follow-up one-shot Item 47, which I actually haven't seen yet.
I haven't either.
So, new things. New things for everybody.
You can find our updates here on YouTube as well as on Twitter and Coffee at FANSPLAINED. If you want more of our conversations on the MCU and other fandoms, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for new episode notifications. Until next time, Salt Shakers, this has been Ryan.
And I'm Em.
With the FANSPLAINED podcast. And we'll see you next week.